right? A $40,000 lump sum at the end of the 3 or 4 year tenure with you is a fairly sizable amount that will hopefully get them across the line for their first home acquisition, right? Now, if they're acquiring a $300,000 or $400,000 property, they can definitely get in with that kind of amount, right? And you know what? You've played a major role in doing that, and without them really missing a beat, right? They're paying their way, they understand the pain, you're helping them out, you're sort of giving them a bit of a helping hand the whole way through, but at the back end of it, they feel a sense of accomplishment because they've saved their own deposit for themselves, and they feel very fulfilled about their achievement of saving up that $40,000 for their particular first home. Hi there, Andrew David Courtney coming at you with how to help your children buy their first home. Now, how it works is this, right? As parents, right, you got your timeline, right, for your children, right? You obviously want to help your children all the way through their life, right? But the problem is you got to pick and choose because you've only got limited resources available to you, right? So you got to ask yourself, well, how old are your children first and foremost? And if let's say this is 65 years old, right, and this is 0, right, where do you currently sit? Today we're going to be talking about from 18 up to 35 years old, right? Potentially 25, right? 25. So how does that work? Well, ultimately, how do you help them the most, right? Well, to do that, what you need to do is make sure that you know what their priorities are. And the first thing that they always talk about is, well, how the hell do I acquire my first property, right? Because they typically want to buy a car and all that kind of stuff. But the most prudent financial decision that they may want to consider for themselves is, or the question that they should be asking themselves is, how do I acquire my first property, right? And as a parent, especially if they're living with you, you've got this particular option. Let me break it down for you, right? Right now, if they were to move out, let's say your children are 18 years old, right? If they were to move out, that 18-year-old will most likely be paying $150 to $250 per week of rent, right? Where they're doing some kind of share house or got some roommates, that kind of thing, right? So that's the kind of rent that they would be paying outside if they were to go out on their own. So if they're living with you, well, the question that I have to ask you is, are they currently paying board? Because if they're going to be paying board, guess what? They're going to be entertaining the idea, especially if their board is exactly the same as what they could be getting out in the marketplace. Well, they'll be asking themselves, is it actually worth my while going down the path of staying with mom and dad when I have to pay the same amount anyway, right? And little do they know, they forget about the different kinds of costs like groceries and all the other kinds of costs that sneak up on you. Internet, electricity, water, all of that stuff that these young adults tend to forget, right? So you've got to ask yourself, well, how do you deliver a strategy that allows them to get a massive leg up for themselves to increase the likelihood of achieving their version of financial freedom sooner by getting into the property ladder sooner, right? Let me break these things down for you. What if you were to guarantee them a deposit after that 7-year period, right? A deposit up to $50,000, right? This is where the first home super saver scheme comes into play, right? How does it work? Well, what you can do is you can come up with a deal where instead of paying board, what you tell them is, especially this is for 18-year-olds who are working full time, right? If they're currently working and they're paying above 32 cents on the dollar, right? i.e. earning more than $32,000 per year in their current salaries, right? So it could be an 18 or a 21-year-old still living at home, trying to get their feet on the ground, trying to find their way financially, right? So what you can do is you can come up with a deal with them where you sit down and you say, look, instead of paying us board, why don't we come up with a deal where you stash some money away for your house deposit? Now, what you can do as a parent is this. You can get them to, instead of paying you board, what you can do is you can put that money, $150 to, let's say, $250 per week, into their superannuation account, right? So they have to prove to you that they've done it. And the key thing here is it has to be a voluntary contribution. Very important, right? You want it voluntary, because if it's not voluntary, right, it's going to be post-tax contribution and it doesn't fit within the First Home Super Saver Scheme. So what is the First Home Super Saver Scheme? Ultimately, you can add as much as $50,000 to your children's super as a concessional contribution or a voluntary contribution from your children, right? That's the key, right? It's going to be their contribution into their super over a 3 or 4 financial year period, right? The maximum amount you can put down is $15,000 per annum, right? So if you go 3 financial years, you can get up to $45,000. And obviously over the 4th financial year, you can get an extra $5,000 in there. Now, what's the benefit of doing this? Well, what happens is they stash money away for a specific purpose and can only be withdrawn once, right, in a future date, only to acquire their property, right? So instead of them going somewhere else, you're practically guaranteeing them being able to acquire their first property by saving the deposit for them, helping them save the deposit for them, right? Upwards of $50,000. Now, how does it work? Well, ultimately, what happens is instead of having money, let's say that $15,000 going into their pocket, right? What happens is obviously the ATO takes a cut, right? So what does that look like? Well, the ATO's cut is typically 32 cents on the dollar, right? So what does that look like? 15,000 times 32 cents on the dollar is equivalent to $4,800, right? So they're basically pocketing 10,200, right? What if they utilize the First Home Super Saver Scheme, right? What would happen there is they would get taxed because they're putting it into super at 15 cents on the dollar, right? So that $15,000, there's $12,750 going into their super, right? And ultimately, what happens is there's a few more steps, and what typically happens is instead of getting taxed 32 cents on the dollar, they're basically saving themselves 15 cents on the dollar of taxes. So what does that equate to for each $15,000 tranche? It looks like this, right? It equates to a savings of $2,250 per $15,000 tranche. So what does that look like? Well, you multiply that out by 3, right? And that gets you to a fairly sizable amount, right? Times 3, $6,750 worth of taxes saved over a 3-year period, right? So essentially, as an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old who's planning to stay with you for the next 3 years, what's that? So $15,000 divided by 52 is approximately $288 per week, right? So instead of charging them board, right, or charging them rent, what you can do is you can say, guess what? You're going to live here. I'm going to pay for your food, right? You're going to live here for free. But the kicker is this. You have to put in $288 per week, right, into your superannuation as a concessional or a voluntary contribution, right? And you have to prove to me that you have done this for me to allow you to live here for free. And the upside that you get out of this particular exercise is A, you get to save approximately $7,000 worth of taxes, right? And over a 3-year period, you'll have approximately, what's that? So $15,000, $12,500 times 3. You'll have approximately $40,000, right, at the end of that 4-year period where you've added $50,000 worth of concessional contributions, right, into, you'll have $40,000 because of the tax savings, right, $43,000, I should say, right, because of the tax savings, right, that you can pocket and utilize to buy your first home, right? So how does it look? Well, instead of paying rent is now not happening, right? What you're doing is you're putting money into your super only to withdraw under your First Home Super Saver Scheme, right? You can only withdraw once and you've got 1 to 2 years to acquire your first property. And the beauty of this thing is so long as you don't own any property in Australia, you can withdraw at any time in the future to acquire your very, very first property. The pitfall is this. You don't want to buy an investment property first. You want to buy your first home first, right? This is what this scheme is all about. So you got to ask yourself, is it actually worthwhile, right? You can set this up for your children who are currently living at home, and you can make this, you can trade, you can negotiate with them, and you can make sure that they increase the likelihood of saving themselves a sizable deposit to allow them to get into the property market, right? A $40,000 lump sum at the end of the 3 or 4 year tenure with you is a fairly sizable amount that will hopefully get them across the line for their first home acquisition, right? Now, if they're acquiring a $300,000 or $400,000 property, they can definitely get in with that kind of amount, right? And you know what? You've played a major role in doing that, and without them really missing a beat, right? They're paying their way, they understand the pain, you're helping them out, you're sort of giving them a bit of a helping hand the whole way through, but at the back end of it, they feel a sense of accomplishment because they've saved their own deposit for themselves, and they feel very fulfilled about their achievement of saving up that $40,000 for their particular first home, right? So let me back up and show you in a bird's eye view once more, right? So instead of charging them board, right, which they'll probably hate you for, right? And instead of pushing them away and getting them to pay someone else, why don't you get them to pay themselves first, right? So the condition of you, this is what you tell them, the condition of you staying under my roof is this. You have to make extra contributions to your superannuation, which is tax deductible. Instead of getting taxed at 32 cents in the dollar, it'll get taxed at 15 cents in the dollar. But the kicker is this. In a few years' time, once you've amassed $50,000 worth of extra contributions, you can pull the majority of that out, right? And utilize it to acquire your first home. This is a strategy where you can help someone get into acquiring their first home and onto the property ladder. It is a very, very common mistake where people seem to think that it's impossible to get in now, right? These are the different strategies that you may want to consider as a parent, especially if you're trying to help your children who are hovering around this particular age bracket, right? 18 to 25 years old, right? I hope you've learned something new. If you've got any questions, make sure you fire them at me in the comments. And if you've got any other topics that you'd like me to cover off on, make sure you share it in the comments below, right? Like it, smash that subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you on our next video. Thanks very much. See you very soon. Ciao.